I'll start off telling you a little bit about myself. I've been working in the world of data and analytics for about 20 years now. Currently, I'm at a consultancy, Transparent, and what we do is focus on enabling marketing outcomes. So if advertisers want to acquire more customers or get more for their money out of marketing, or if you're trying to achieve better customer experience, or if you're trying to learn something about consumer insight, there's a lot of data and technology that enables those things. So what we do is we think about what are the things that you need to put in place, data, technology, etc. And then how do you measure the outcomes that you really care about, whether it's marketing or customer experience or other things that roll up into these things. So I've spent a lot of time really focused on marketing and measurement, but specifically measurement across various areas. I spent the last 8 or so years in the world of marketing and media at various agencies. Got a really good feel for modeling, how you can get predictive and kind of make some guesses as to what things cause the things that you really care about. Prior to that, I spent roughly 8 years at Deloitte, really focused on more risk management and data and analytics, but more for accounting and more like a risk lens to it. I actually started my career at Nielsen, my professional career at Nielsen, with one of the most iconic metrics out there, the Nielsen rating, TV rating, which was a lot of fun. And back then we didn't really call it analytics, it was just called it statistics. So I had my degree in psychology and was relatively comfortable in statistics. So that's a little bit about me, and I'm really excited to talk with you all about metrics. So I'd love to hear a little bit about, just want to kind of take a pulse in the room and kind of hear, so who here is in a role that is focused on metrics? Yeah, responsible for metrics and analytics and working with data in general. Okay, cool. And how about, I don't know, what else is out there? That's kind of like, it's not your main function. Data analytics or metrics, not your main function, but you're just kind of interested.
Just kind of data curious.
And then how about industries? Are there any folks here that are in primarily trying to drive marketing, well, kind of like a domain, but marketing and media? Folks here from that world? Yeah. Okay. And then how about retail folks? Yeah, healthcare, manufacturing, finance. Okay, across the board. That's awesome. All right, so a lot of my area of expertise is really around marketing and media. So a lot of the things that I'll cover are from that area. And then I'd love to hear from you guys. Hopefully I'll talk for about 40 minutes, 45 minutes or so. And we'll also open it up for questions. But I'd love to hear what are some of the things that you would like to learn or like to know? What are some of the reasons you guys showed up? You just kind of shout it out.
How do you generally figure out what kinds of metrics you're supposed to measure?
Okay, perfect, good.
And on top of that, in a sea of data.
Yep.
So kind of just understanding what are the actual metrics that I can push aside and not care about too much, and necessarily focus on.
Yes. Okay.
Along those lines, keeping it meaningful.
Yep. Great.
And how much time do you need to release something before you can expect to begin to get a good view of what your metrics are and if they're successful?
Okay, very good, yeah.
I just underscore what others have said. I formerly worked for one retail outfit, and they seemed to be chasing these metrics that had no apparent correlation with control of store profits. They were wondering why are we doing this?
Yep.
How to use the metrics to drive action.
Okay, good.
I think it's more of how you identify the problems you're going to solve with the business.
Yep. Cool.
Also, how do you establish commitment to metrics?
Okay.
How to settle metrics in soft skills performance.
Okay. Okay. Specific domain. Yep. Okay. Very good.
Yeah, and I think just like how to create a culture around like making people want to care about metrics and like participate in gathering and using them.
Okay. Good.
I was going to say it's a bit of forecasting versus target setting, right? numbers that they want to hit and the numbers that are likely to hit, and kind of how do you work with the data to find that happy medium without,
Mm-hmm.
you know, manipulating too much.
Good. Okay, wonderful. It's a great group. I feel like there could be some crowdsourcing of information as well at some point. But I'm going to go through my material, and I actually think that what I have here will likely cover most of what you guys are interested in. The thing that I'll say is there is no silver bullet. Like, there is no one right answer, but I think a lot of what I'm hearing are a lot of the challenges that you face, and I'll give you a little bit of perspective on it and some frameworks and tools that you can apply to get hopefully a little bit better, and give you a little bit of context and perspective on this. All right, so the power of data, right? We all understand how powerful data is. There's a lot of proof around this in terms of just the modern world that we live in, which is, I'm just going to go a little bit deep here, which is kind of amazing, kind of magical. If you were someone that were living in that were alive a few generations ago, right? And so much of this is powered by data, and especially the last 15, 20 years, the rise of the internet. Many of our most innovative and valuable companies now are really founded in data, specifically data about people, but also data about operations, right? And there's huge promise around where data will take us. This is the idea of the singularity, which is kind of futuristic idea that very well may actually occur. That the future may be a place where it's kind of unrecognizable from today, and a lot of this is understood that there's data is going to be a big part of driving this. But in addition, we all have huge expectations as consumers around the kinds of things that we can now do and the kinds of things that we'd like to do in the future. And really, the big key to this is data really powering that. The issue is, it's kind of like what you guys just kind of brought up, is it's a paradox, right? Because it seems like there's an amazing capability. We might be running into a whole new dimension of the future, but sometimes you get all the data together and the expectations are missed. And I've seen this over and over again, right? There's huge expectations. You think, oh, it's going to be data-driven. What does the data say? But when the rubber meets the road, the expectations are often missed. Sometimes you can't even get the data that you're looking for. Okay, so this is a little bit around this idea of data and analytics and really how the names have kind of changed over time. This is a little trend from Hacker News. Maybe you guys have seen this. I'm a little bit addicted to reading it, but it's a news site that comes out of an incubator out of Silicon Valley area, Y Combinator. But it's got really great information on it across different areas, but it's a great way to get a pulse on what are startups thinking about, what are innovators thinking about. And you can see that, back in, this only goes back to 2007, and really prior to this, it's kind of like, these are some of the main things that are on the front page. So statistics was like up there, and I kind of picked terms that were related to working with data, using data, right? So statistics, math, AI is actually out there, which I was kind of surprised to see, but data science no one even used that word. And big data was very, very low. So you kind of see across the time, around here, data science started getting really big. Big data, there was like a lot of hype around big data for a while. And then that kind of went away, and then you kind of see all the emphasis, this is more current, around AI and machine learning, et cetera. But at the end of the day, it's really all the same kind of thing. It's really using data and analytics to drive decision making, to drive action. For those of us in sort of like a primary data role, it's a challenging role. Because number one, you've got to understand the industry, you have to understand the business and the domain, you have to really guide through defining objectives, you have to capture data, wrangle the data, then you have to apply a model or a method or a technology to it, and then you've got to visualize and communicate it. That's not easy. And at the end of the day, you need to inspire action and prove the impact. None of these things are hard. Okay, so it's really a challenge. I'm sorry, none of these things are easy. And so your challenge is to gain a unique view from data to answer questions, solve problems, and guide the business or the organization.
Is it okay to ask questions
Sure.
during the presentation? Okay. Which of the different elements do you perceive to be the least difficult?
The least difficult?
You said none of them are easy, so there you go.
I'd say inspiring action and proving impact. Those are hard. A lot of times proving impact is hard. But it depends on your situation. A lot of times capturing data, wrangling the data. A lot of times the models and the methods are sort of the easiest part. Visualizing and communication, there's been a lot of emphasis on that. So yeah.
Is there any interaction between the two lists on each side? Do they interact at all? Or
This is sort of a flow, kind of like,
does it go?
goes kind of like this, and then kind of like this.
Okay.
Yeah. Sure.
The slide that shows the yearly news front page.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
To before, you don't have to go back if you don't want to it. Did you take the total number of front page shots on a yearly basis and then divide those by the number of times that?
Yeah, I grabbed it from a site that kind of follows the trends on happenings.
The site itself,
Yeah. A different site does it.
per year, and then divide that number by the number of times those other metrics that you measure.
Yeah. I'm not sure. I don't know the exact methodology, but I can send you the site. You can check it out. All right, I'm gonna keep going. All right, so challenge and opportunity. So here's the thing: metrics are really fundamental to this. A lot of times, it's a big part of your job. Right? Okay, so here are the topics: how to pick the right KPIs, how to pick the right metrics. Okay. This is a bit of a list of kind of the directions and how to do it, kind of the best practices. So really, number 1 and 2 are super important. So if you're looking for the silver bullet, it's somewhere in here, right? It's starting with the business and strategic objectives. It's creating a plan on which metrics will be used for what purpose. Okay, and then this third area here, I've got a ton of examples of sort of different ways to think about metrics and some different examples. And I think some of those will kind of be familiar too. I'm not going to go into them in depth because I want to keep it efficient. Another big thing is really around driving learning. So how do you establish a process to drive this idea of learning? Because you use metrics for some things, you also want to make sure that you're using it for longer term learning. And then lastly here is something around collaboration and integrating with the business. Again, I do think that this is one of the biggest challenges, and I've got some perspective on that. Okay, so start with the business and strategic objectives. So again, all right, kind of going deep again here. We're living through an explosion of data, right? I'm sure you've heard about this, and it is sort of mind-boggling. In addition, a lot of the technologies that we use. So this is a list of all the marketing technologies over time. And it's growing exponentially as well. Now, what comes with it are, each of these new technologies have new sets of data and new metrics associated with it. So it's overwhelming, right? So it can overwhelm and distract. Sometimes people say, let's just get all the data in one room. Let's just put all the data on these gigantic screens. That'll probably make things better. And it doesn't, right? And I've seen this like several times in different organizations, sort of the idea, especially around like the big data era. Big data, it's gonna be awesome. But again, it's the missed expectations. And I don't think you guys have ever heard the word snockered, but I learned that from this comment. Okay, so what do you do? So how do you create that focus? So number one thing, this is going to be the most important thing, it's really document your business and strategic objectives. So really align with your stakeholders or align with your organization on what is actually really, really important. And make sure you get it documented and make sure you get it, you're signed off and you're aligned on it. So this is an example for marketing for like a retail organization. End of the day, they want to grow profit, they want to increase sales, they want to acquire new customers, they want to retain their existing customers. A lot of times they want to expand their e-commerce sales, and then there are different marketing and media objectives that will ladder up into that. So, but knowing what this is and knowing what language is used here, you've got to make sure that any of the metrics that you're paying attention to connect back into this. Okay?
So,
Yes.
you see a distinction between upward management versus downward management as far as that goes, because you mentioned alignment, and so there's aligning too, and then there's the dictating part from the higher ups, right, as far as like what's to align to, right?
Yeah. So I think one way to think about that is really, if you look at some annual reports like what we have here from some major organizations, kind of like, well, what are the business and strategic objectives? What's really the most important, and what's the evidence for it? You can oftentimes find that from a year-end annual report, right? So this is Walmart, and they're looking at revenue, operating cash flow, how much is returned to stakeholders, comparative sales, e-commerce growth, club membership. Those are the things that are going to be the strategic objectives that they're really interested in. For Boeing, another example here, they're making sales, they're building airplanes, they're delivering airplanes, et cetera, right? So you want to make sure that you've got that deep understanding. So that's number one. Now, highly connected to that is number two here, which is have a plan on which metrics will be used for what purpose. This is again a learning that I've been through, where you just get all the data in one place, it doesn't get you where you want to go. And again, there's an overwhelming number of metrics out there, as many of you guys have kind of said. So how do you classify the metrics, and how do you pick the right metrics? Really, the most succinct way to describe this is choose the metrics that you can, or classify your metrics according to how you will use them, right? Make sure that there's an action around what metrics, around the metrics that you're going to be paying attention to. So this is a very kind of fundamental way to classify your metrics. And then I'll go into a whole bunch of other ways you can classify metrics. But I found this to be very, very helpful, and it's saying, okay, you might have three kinds of ways that you're going to use a given metric. Number one, you might say, this is the metric that's going to tell me whether or not we achieved the thing that we want to achieve, or we didn't. We're determining your success based on it. Okay, so that might be meeting a sales goal or something like that. Gaining adoption of something. Otherwise, there are metrics where it's going to actually drive you to optimize. It's going to drive you to make changes. So if one metric is, if metric for one thing is larger than that same metric for the other, and you care about the first thing and doing that, you're gonna put more effort, more money, whatever it is, into that. So it's gonna guide your actions, guide your optimizations. Sometimes if you're really lucky, your optimization metric is the same as your sales metric. Like if it's an e-commerce sale, for instance, you might just be optimizing against your sale, and that's fantastic. Now there are other metrics that you care about, but you're not necessarily tying your success to, you're not necessarily taking action on a regular basis around, but they provide context. Maybe you know that, for instance, click-through rate is kind of a noisy, goofy metric out there, but historically we've paid attention to it, so you might want to still kind of get a read on that.
So what was that? Could you repeat that again?
Click-through rate.
Oh, click-through rate. Okay, sorry.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Does that make sense so far, guys? So this is really, how do you action? What's your plan of action, right? And then to get a bit deeper, this is, again, from the world of marketing and media, it's really getting very specific. So setting out to create a measurement framework and getting alignment from your stakeholders on, okay, these are the metrics that we care about. This is specifically what we care about in terms of what we're going to determine our success around, what we're going to optimize around, what we're going to just pay attention to provide context to our understanding of what's going on, right? So it's all the, and where are those metrics coming from? What are the measurement platforms that you're going to use? What are the technologies that this is coming out of? And then here, this is a marketing funnel of the consumer journey, right? For every phase in the journey, every media channel, what are the optimization metrics, success metrics, contextual metrics that you're gonna use, okay? And when are those metrics gonna become available to see? When are you gonna optimize each given channel? That will help you, because a lot of times, your stakeholders are impatient and they don't realize that things take time in order to show up, in order for you to get a read. So you want to make sure that you have a plan in place and that you can optimize in the most efficient way. And also, when you kind of lay it out this way, you say, oh, well, what am I going to optimize on if this particular kind of custom study is not ready? What am I going to optimize on in the meantime? Kind of lay that out, and then you can have a plan for yourself. All right.
So would some of these be noted in the annual report?
So, well, the idea is that many of them would roll into it, right? That's, again, making sure that any of these things that you're choosing for success, you think of it like this: anything you're choosing as a success metric probably should roll very closely and directly into a strategic objective. Anything that's an optimization metric ought to be highly connected to that success metric, right? You want to be optimizing on things that have a proven relationship to the outcome that you're looking to drive. Okay, here's another important thing. So when you present your metrics and your dashboards, right? A lot of times, what I would hear business users say is, "Well, I don't know if these numbers are good or bad. Is it good or bad? I don't know." Right? So you really need to provide that context. So use benchmarks in order to do that. So this is, I pulled this randomly. This is looking at customer complaints, right? So it's like, if in a month you've got more than a certain number of customer complaints, that triggers an action. That's the red bar. If you've got, and this is the goal, so you want to get under that. So this provides the context of, are things okay or not okay, right? And what are the actions that you need to take? And then this is a spider chart, one of my favorite charts out there, but kind of hard to understand always. But the point here is that there's, right, different dimensions. This is where you want to be. This is kind of like best in class. This would be where the average is, and then this is where like the given subject is, kind of like around average, maybe a little bit better. Gives you the context of, okay, is this okay, not okay, and where do I need to take action? So another really important grounding thing. Now, how do you create the metrics? You can often start with industry standards. You want to build up your data and past performance to refine those benchmarks, determine goals based on those strategic objectives, or to improve past performance, and a lot of times you have to recalibrate as you go. Okay, so that was kind of like a lot of the heart of this. Maybe I'll stop there. Any thoughts or questions? Yes.
This might be more of a thought or question, but with the success metrics and the optimization metrics, is it important to distinguish between like lagging and leading indicators?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. So actually, I'll have a few slides on that as well.
Okay. Let's jump in.
Exactly. Yeah. Because but just to quickly answer you, yeah, I'll get to it when I get there. But you want to make sure that a really great optimization metric would be a leading indicator of the success metric.
That's
care
kind of what I was
about, right?
thinking,
Absolutely, absolutely. And the tricky thing is, most of the times, or oftentimes, the thing that you really care about tends to be a lagging indicator. You have to wait for it. Yeah.
Maybe you'll be getting to this, but do you have an example? You walk through like a specific company's strategic objective and then how that filters down to different types of metrics?
I don't know if I could come up with an example off the fly, but I've got a few in here as we kind of go through it. We'll help with that. Yeah.
A bit smart that of that would be if you look at Bloomberg 24 hours, favored network. And there's about 4 or 5 different correspondents from all over the globe, live feed,
Yeah.
and they give you a bunch of metrics.
Yeah.
Every 5 minutes for you to consume. So if you do that on Blue and it's free, that gives you an idea of all the changing conditions.
That's right. Yeah, which has to do with kind of like the timeliness, exactly. So, okay, so good point. Now, here are some different attributes of metrics to consider, because I was kind of thinking through. Okay, well, when people are thinking about metrics, what are they thinking about, right? So again, make sure that you've got the actionability around it, but then these are some other things. So these are kind of like thought starters, okay? Like what specifically are you measuring? What is the metric representative of? So this is a consumer journey model. So people need something, they consider, they buy, they have a post-purchase experience. Maybe they buy again, and maybe they do that several times. So there are data that you can capture around every single, like multiple points in here. So what is it that you're measuring, right? And if you're measuring a sale, like that's great. But what's even better is to get to a measure of value, right? So how can you measure multiple sales coming through, and how can you get a measure into, not every conversion is the same. Some people are buying something, they're spending $5, other times they're spending $500. So how do you then get a measure that's representative of the value of the thing, okay? And then in addition, you guys have probably seen something like this in terms of just general data and analytics, right? So data and analytics can be descriptive and diagnostic, predictive, prescriptive. The descriptive and diagnostic is a pretty basic, direct measure of like a count of something, things like that, right? Things that you can kind of empirically observe. When you get into the predictive and prescriptive, it tends to be more valuable, but there's also more skepticism around it, right? And so that's also just important to know, because there's a ton of metrics that come out of the predictive models and the prescriptive models. So just knowing, okay, well, what is it that I'm looking at here? Because sometimes you run into skepticism, and you say, well, actually, the metric you're looking at is fairly descriptive. Like, there's no question about this metric. It's just the count of sales that are coming through. You may not believe the model that's attributing it to the different drivers, but it's just a descriptive metric, right? So knowing that. Now, knowing that the predictive and the prescriptive, they have biases. Especially there can be some biases. So having a sense of what is the bias that your metric has, right? So these are some things out of the marketing media world, but there's marketing mix models. So these are models, probably many of you are familiar with this. It's to capture what are the drivers of sales across all the different things that would cause people to buy something. And it's really a measure of the mass response to mass media. So you're looking at kind of the masses rather than the individuals. The issue with marketing mix modeling is that it's really only giving you a view into the short-term sales, like the sales over the course of like a month or two, that you can then kind of trace back. It doesn't really necessarily get you into the longer-term kind of sales that might be driven by brand, right? And then conversely, there's this thing called multi-touch attribution, which is a direct measure of individuals. It's the individual response to individual media exposure, and it's pretty awesome, right? And you can get very, very granular with it. But the issue is you can only measure certain things. Like Facebook is historically really, really hard to get into that model. And there's different parameters that will influence what is being attributed based on how long you're giving people to convert, right? So there are different biases that are introduced. And then you might have controlled experiments, you might have surveys. Those have issues around sampling and things of that nature. Okay. Yes, sir.
In the previous slide, you showed how the number of indicators increases year by year to where you got thousands nowadays instead of 150 just a few years back. So when you come up with all kinds of different metrics, at some point, just to kind of maintain some sanity, do you have like a strategy or approach to narrowing down the number of metrics that you're initially kind of considering so that you could get a better sense for how to go to the last phase of prescription,
Yeah, I think all these things, but the only thing I'll say that's related to that is in terms of optimization, a lot of times it's important to try to get it to as low as you can to hopefully one metric for a given like tactic, right? So you want to make sure you're optimizing on. A lot of times you might have multiple things that I'm going to optimize on this and that, but they might conflict. So you want to do some due diligence around, well, what is the best what is the best optimization metric that has a proven relationship with the thing that you care about. Okay, so here we get into leading and lagging. Okay, so here's that example, right? And again, I think I already kind of covered this when talking about answering that question, but these are really good optimization metrics if it's a leading indicator of something that you really care about. This is often the thing that you care about, so hopefully you find some leading metrics. And then this is a whole kind of area of topic around sometimes metrics are related to one another, but they're not necessarily causal, right? They might be correlated, but not causal. This is kind of a interesting one here that has an example here around temperature can influence both ice cream sales and murder rate, but ice cream probably doesn't have anything to do with murder rate. Okay. Okay. Now this is addressing when your metrics become available, because a lot of times the metrics that you have available right away, and again, this is a marketing and media example. These are metrics when you're running a media campaign, like a digital media campaign. You get a slew of metrics that are available right away. Tons of metrics around can people see the thing that can people see the ad? How many people are seeing it? How often are they seeing it? How many unique visitors do you get, right? It takes usually a little bit of time in order to say, if you're trying to influence the brand sentiment, you have a brand study. That takes a while in order to collect the information and get to that kind of insight. And then marketing mix models, like that's one of the big things is really understanding what are the drivers and how should I optimize the things that we're putting money into. The marketing mix model takes a while, it takes months after the last sale for the period until you kind of get it. So having that sense of when do the metrics become available helps you plan in terms of that. Okay, so this is also good to think about when you're thinking about your metrics. It's can you move the needle, and how does that needle move? Like how does that metric move over time? So some metrics move really, really slow, like brand sentiment. That is a hard metric to move, and it moves very, very slowly. Sales, you can move them quickly. You just lower the price. You can have a promotion. You can move those sales quickly, right? So knowing how persuadable, how sensitive is the metric number one. Some metrics are super noisy. I mentioned before click-through rate. It's a real goofy metric. There's a lot of fraud and bots that happen, and also just user error. People accidentally click things. It's a very noisy metric, so you probably don't want to be optimizing to every one of these moves, right? So knowing how does the metric move over time, diminishing return, right? So just because you get a really great initial return on something like spending money on advertising, right? The first dollar that you spend, the first messages you get out there, they're going to have an outsized impact compared to once you've already reached all the people that are interested in your product and service. You keep putting money into it, you're going to get far less of a return of an impact, right? And this is also the case for maybe site traffic or other things. So knowing just because you're getting a good return now, or there's a relationship between two metrics now, that relationship may diminish over time. So understanding how that works. Okay, when it stops, this has to do with reaching statistical significance. So I've seen measurement plans in place where it's like, okay, well, we're gonna optimize based on this brand study. The issue with most brand studies are set up as a simple control expose, and then getting to whether or not a given channel or tactic created a lift in the brand sentiment. But the way it works is after a certain period of time, it's either yes it did or no it didn't, and the significance around it So you can't really expect to be optimizing off that metric over a long period of time. You're just basically going to hit statistical significance, and you're kind of done. Now you need to figure out, how that will impact your next campaign. Okay? So some metrics kind of stop at a certain point, and then they need to recalibrate. So right now, there's a ton of consumer privacy changes and developments that are occurring. Safari is this new thing called ITP that's completely changing the way that cookies are set and expiring. Same across all the web browsers. So when you're looking at site analytics now, if you're looking at unique visitors, for instance, it's going to look like you're getting more unique visitors, and that people are spending less time on your site because the cookie will expire. So I'm going to look, if I was at a site yesterday and I'm not signed in, I'm going to look like a new person when I go there today. So just understanding what is the environment, how does the metric actually get a read, and do I need to recalibrate? Okay, yes.
Can you go into that in more detail?
Recalibration? Okay, so let's say you've got a goal of getting 25,000 unique visitors on your site every week. And then all of a sudden you see, oh my goodness, now I'm getting 40,000. But it's not really due to more unique people coming to your site. It's just due to the way that metric is being captured. Okay, so it's more of a back-end kind of mechanism that captures the data rather than the actual phenomena that you really care about. So
what do you do about that?
So what do you do about that? You recalibrate. So you say, okay, now my reality is not what my reality was here, but now it's actually here. Because it has to do with there's a bias in the metric. There's probably a bias in most metrics, right? So knowing, okay, now here's the trend. Now I'm going to change my benchmark because now this is what even the same kind of environment, but with a different tracking mechanism, now looks like this. It often even comes up.
How do you change that?
How do you change it? You just look at the trend. You might just say, I'm going to look at my average. Instead of looking at the average over 6 months, knowing that this new change occurred, you're going to say, I'm going to kind of be open-minded for the first month or two and just kind of observe it and not necessarily react to it or optimize against it. And then say, okay, now I'm going to take the average over the course of 2 months, and that's going to be my new benchmark. Something like that.
How is that significant versus the total universe of visitors?
Might have to cover that one separately. Okay. Here's another important attribute of under metrics. How granular are they? Okay, are you looking, if you're talking about people, are you measuring mass or are you measuring down to the individual level? If you're looking at time, you're measuring for a year or down to the second, right? So what are the optimization actions you can take? And what are the things that you care about happening, or what are the insights you're trying to achieve? And are you capturing data at that level of granularity, or are you gonna miss, right? If you're interested in your product, you're probably interested in not just like the master product, but all the different variations of that product. So you want to make sure that if you're capturing sales, for instance, that you're doing it at that more granular level. Now, as you get more granular, typically it's harder to capture the data, so you need to make sure that you've got data governance in place and a consistency of taxonomy. That means the consistency of taxonomy has to do with you're naming things the same way all the time, and that it's machine readable would be the best way to do it, so that you can easily get it integrated and easily have access to the level of granularity of the data that you actually care about. Okay, great. Okay, then another thing to look at here is metrics are often composed of other metrics, and you can kind of get creative. You can kind of see some creative things come out of this. A lot of times, using a rate is really helpful because it allows you to compare kind of like an apples to apples basis. So what's the return on ad spend across different channels? since that would be how much money you're spending, and then what are you getting in return, and set up the rate that way. Okay, I'm gonna keep going here. How should you represent your metric? This is really important. This is a classic over here of how should things be represented so that it's clear. And then on the right hand side, this is kind of like a good demonstration of if you're predicting a hurricane, right? A hurricane's not going to happen in like one specific spot. It's going to happen over a large space. This actually represents the range of potential areas of impact. But it would be foolish to just like only look at that line, right? You want to make sure that you're covering the full area, because that's just the reality of how hurricanes run. You can kind of cover different areas, right? Now, we see this in the media world a lot. There's this thing called frequency. This is how often or how many times someone's been exposed to the same message, right? And what you see is that people describe it as one number. Oh, this is our optimal frequency. It's 7. Oh, that's cool. But the issue is that the way that frequency is distributed, this happens every time I've ever seen it. If you actually look at the distribution of, well, how many people are exposed once? Tons of people. Usually about half the people are exposed to a message only one time. If you're looking at even like a month period or a 2-week period. Okay, that's the other kind of thing to think about is how long are you looking at. And then how many people are exposed twice? Still a ton of people, 3, 4, 5. A bunch of people are there, right? And then people exposed 9 times, 15 times, 29 times, 100 times. I've seen people exposed 1,000 times. That's typically a fraud or a bot, right? But what that does is there's this long tail of people being exposed. And then what you get is this number, 7.4, that's not representative at all of what's actually happening, right? And so what you want to do is you want to say, all right, well, I want to make sure that I know what's happening over here so I can control it. So that's going to be wasted. And I want to then do some analysis around, well, what's optimal? Is optimal somewhere in here? That's great. But I want to not just pay attention to the average. I want to try to pay attention to how many people am I moving into 3 and 5 and 7, if that's what's really optimal. So
Why?
Why? Because this is just the way kind of marketing media works, where if I give you a message like 3 or 4 times, that might be great, and if I give you, then that might persuade you to do the thing that I'm asking you to do. But if I keep going at you, saying it, and, giving you the same message 50 times, 60 times, you're not going to like that, and you're not going to convert. So that's just wasted. That's a wasted resource. Wasted investment.
So I'm missing the point.
So, the point is that some metrics are better represented as the full distribution, or more than just a single number, because there's a lot more to optimize around and understand rather than just a single number. You want to understand more of the full picture.
So what do you do with this information?
What do you do with it? Maybe we'll talk more after. We'll talk more after. Okay. All right. So here's another construct: vanity metrics, right, and unintended consequences. So this guy Eric Ries, who wrote Lean Startup, talks about vanity metrics about 10 years ago. So these are metrics that make you feel good, sound awesome, but they're not really actionable. They don't really help you achieve the thing that you're trying to achieve. Now, I'd love to say, here's the list of vanity metrics to stay away from, but that doesn't exist, because sometimes it might seem like a vanity metric, but it might actually be important. But an example here might be something like click-through rate, or it might be something like a social media like, okay? Or here's another example: is in e-commerce, you do care about traffic, and you want to drive traffic. You want to drive people visiting your site, because there's generally a good relationship between traffic and conversion. People get people buying the thing or doing the thing that you want them to do. The issue is that if you put too much emphasis on traffic and you just say, okay, I want to get tons of traffic as much as I possibly can, and I want to pay the least amount for it. That cheap traffic comes with a lot of fraud and bots. And so all of a sudden, you're getting a lot of traffic, but it's not converting. You actually had more conversion with less traffic at some point. So now traffic is the vanity metric here. You're paying too much attention to something where it's not actually driving the thing that you're trying to drive. Okay. Another example would be cost per acquisition, or a cost per like an application, say for a bank or for an insurance company, right? You want to drive those applications in as many as you can, and you often want to look at how many what's the maximum number I can drive with a minimum amount of dollars. So you optimize to the cost per acquisition. You want to get that as low as possible. The issue there is, you can get a lot of applications for people that are not qualified, that are not going to be able to convert and to actually get by the insurance, right? And so what you want, so that can be an issue. And so you say, okay, why don't I optimize more toward a lifetime value? So what do the consumers look like that are eligible for the insurance product? And where do they come? What kinds of channels, what kinds of sites are they on? And even though that might be more expensive to get them to persuade them to fill out an application, you're going to get a better return from it because they're higher value. Okay, so understanding that. This is all around, I'm sure you guys are familiar with this, just the phenomena that we're in today, where a lot of the recommendations coming out of YouTube, Facebook, etc., those are optimized toward engagement, right? But they're also they also happen to be kind of outrageous, driving outrage, driving polarization. So that's an unintended consequence. So it's highly related to the vanity metrics. Okay, so we go through a couple more things, and I'll leave it up, open up to a few more questions. Okay, so we just went through a bunch there. Now here's another major thing to just have in mind. You've got a bunch of metrics. You're using it. You're really focused on actionability, determining success, enabling optimization. The other major thing to take away is how can you drive learning? How do you drive insight? And what's the process around that? Okay. So this is what I'm talking about here. This is just one slide on it, and this is a process. Okay. So what you want to do, and I've seen like really wonderful success with this process, because a lot of times people will say, "Oh, what are the insights? Let's just come up with some insights." And that's hard without being grounded in something, right? So it's number one, back to your business objectives and business and strategic objectives. Start there, but then it's sit with your stakeholders and say, okay, well, what's important? What are the knowledge gaps? What are the questions? What are the problems, right? And then you can often kind of categorize these into themes in order to collect them. And then you prioritize them. So what are we going to do with the information? If we learn this, if we solve this problem, if we close that knowledge gap, can we do something about it? What can we drive with it, right? And that helps you to prioritize. And then you say, okay, well, how do we solve these problems and answer these questions? How much effort does it take, right? And then you set up the roadmap and you say, okay, here's my plan to do it, and then you implement it, and then you learn, right? So that's another really important thing to not kind of lose sight of when you're thinking about metrics. Okay, learning. Cool. Yes.
How do you kind of factor in how much time it takes to, there's certain things that you might come up with that would take months and months and months to get the right data, and a lot of hardware to make that happen.
Yeah.
Versus things that are shorter term that might show real world impact. So how do you kind of think about prioritizing on time for that roadmap and the time that you've got?
Yeah, I mean, we'll often use a pretty foundational construct. It's like, what's the effort to do the thing, or like, how much money will it cost? How many people will need to spend time on it? How long will it take to do? What's the general effort? And then what's the impact that it'll have? Right? You can kind of set it up in quadrants. So there might be things that are really high impact and really low effort, like the low hanging fruit. Let's do that stuff first. And then what are the things that are really high impact but also really hard to do? Let's do those, but let's do those over. Let's make sure we plan for it. Make sure that you've got like a business case around it, make sure that you're going to reap the return for the effort that you're putting into it. So like, just because you've got a problem or a question doesn't mean you should just go and do it, right? You've got to make sure that you're prioritizing. That effort and impact kind of foundational construct usually helps to help with the prioritization. And also the dependencies. Yeah.
So, dealing with a lot of businesses that are very data ignorant, and so they don't really know what levers are driving. They're not marketing where you've got readily available data. So, that quadrants are tough to define for us because we don't really know what the levers are to push on, and so then we don't know the effort to go and get it all. So how would you think about that?
That's tough.
Yeah.
I think that would require, a bit of like a deeper kind of an investigation. Yeah. Sounds like the expectations are high though, right?
Yeah.
Okay. It's a good question though. All right, so this is learning. And then lastly, this is around how do you collaborate and how do you really make the impact that you're trying to make. And so this is just one observation that I've had that probably many of you have had as well is that not all the time, but many times, folks that are in analytics, folks that are working with data, many of us tend to be a little bit more introverted, a little bit more kind of quiet, right? And have other kind of certain defaults that if you use tools like the Myers-Briggs or use like Enneagram, transparent consultancy and that now, these can be helpful. These can be enlightening around what kind of person am I, and what are some of the ways that I communicate, right? And who are my business stakeholders, and where might they fall, right? Some of them might be a little bit more talkative, and might kind of just be interested. What's the answer, right? So how do those different kinds of people work together? Just really, it's more about like really knowing yourself. And then in terms of knowing your audience, again, set the expectations, set it very clearly with the learning agendas, with the measurement frameworks, having a plan for how you're going to use the metrics, and make sure that you're speaking their language with the strategic objectives and business objectives. And then this is the last idea here around continuous improvement. So a lot of times setting up a new thing isn't easy and it takes a long time to do. So you want to make sure that whatever you build, you get a read on it, and then you learn from the experience, and then you continuously improve over time. Okay. Here's a summary. All the things, start with the business objectives, create a plan, think practically, drive learning, collaborate and integrate with your business partners. There's no silver bullet, and it's a great challenge for all of us. Okay. Any other questions? Yes.
So scenarios where you don't have any industry standards or any baseline.
Yeah.
How would you approach those situations, and how would you know how do you know your performance based on if you don't have a baseline or industry standards?
Just start doing it and start capturing data on it, and then look at, is it noisy? Is it movable? What's the average? Kind of like capturing data without determining success, without optimizing against it, unless it's something really obvious to optimize against. Yeah.
Let's stay with marketing and media. Are there any resources that you like that maybe help explain or talk about research between certain metrics? So, like if you have if your success metric is traffic to your retail e-commerce site, and you're trying to decide on what optimization metric to use.
Yeah.
Is there anything you look to?
There are a bunch of resources out there. There's a bunch of research from these guys, Vanity and Field, that has to do with share of market and how that, and kind of like how do you move the brand, and how do those things impact long-term sales. There's also just kind of like reading, Ad Age and other kinds of industry learnings out there. And a lot of times you kind of get it from the vendors, like you might look to Moat or Integral ad service. I asked
What were those two you said?
Moat, it's kind of like they're very focused on viewability and kind of measures of engagement when people are looking at ads. So they're going to have their own research and kind of their own perspective. So there's not necessarily one place to go, but there are different resources out there, and I'm happy to follow up with you as well. I'll probably come with a better list in a little bit of time. All right.
So I'm curious, so, and you talked about data visualization, and I'm curious, is there, there's one guru out there, I think his name's Edward Tufts,
Oh yeah.
and I don't know, maybe it's particular marketing, but you know, he's got a thing that's coming up, a seminar. So for someone who's not really gotten elbow deep in the process, is getting into data visualization, is that putting the cart before the horse? Because or do you really need to kind of get into the mix pretty deep before your data visualization questions become more evident?
Yeah. You know, I know like Tufty is pretty theoretical and like a you know, patriarch of the space. But yeah, I mean, it's become pretty commoditized now. If you just get Tableau or get Domo or any of these other visualization packages, you probably get most of the information you need by experimenting there. There's another guy, his name is Albert Cairo, and he's got some great stuff. He has a blog, and there's a lot of just interesting, entertaining, and useful information there.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
So what do you think would be like the top 5 right metrics for a company that is based on a SaaS model?
I think value is big, right? And like reducing churn. There's a book that comes out of Lean Startup. It's called Lean Analytics, and they actually go into different business models. One of them is a SaaS model, and they actually lay out very specific metrics for that. Yeah, that's a kind of good resource. Yes.
How do you manage, especially if you're developing metrics in-house, how do you sort of weigh the fact that, someone would say, redesign this to get you sort of truer picture versus you just want a similarly calculated number year over year or month over month? Like, how do you deal with that sort of metric drift as people change calculations?
So, sorry, say it again. So you're saying.
So if you're trying to say measure the difficulty with interacting with sort of a overall website or something like that, and someone comes up with a measurement that's better, but it produces a different number, and it's difficult to say, oh, now we're aiming at 100 as opposed to 2.5.
Yeah, that is tricky. I mean, I think that's going to get into recalibration, and that'll happen a lot when a measurement platform will kind of change the way that they measure stuff, and it throws everyone for a loop. Or what I mentioned about like the privacy changes to web behavior. That happens a lot. Or if you go from like one site analytics vendor to the next, everyone freaks out. It's like, our numbers are totally different. Well, it's because there's like nuance to the capture, and that has an impact. So I think educating people on, well, this is not. It seems unexpected, but it's not unexpected because there's a different methodology behind it, and every method has its own. Every way of capturing data is its own bias.
Could you talked about valuable resources. Would you have any specific ones for like how technical people could be better at talking to business people?
I think like the two things that I put up there, the Myers-Briggs and the Enneagram thing, they actually have like books around, especially the Enneagram thing has like kind of books around it, which gets into based on the sort of personality type that you might fall into, what kind of beliefs are associated with it, and what kinds of actions are associated with it when you're stressed out or when you're calm. And those can be very helpful learning. So
and not to get too hung up on semantics, but you're referencing both KPIs and metrics. So is that,
Yeah,
do you find
that's a
that
good
being more palatable, usable out in the business world?
Yeah, I feel like KPIs tend to be used with like multiple definitions. It might be, and like we just made up other ones, like the optimization of the success and the contextual, right? Which has to do, it's grounded in like how are you going to use it. A KPI that might be the sale, it might actually be the thing that you really care about, or in the word, it's like key performance indicator. So in some ways, it's saying that it's an indicator of the thing that you care about. So I think it can be used in multiple ways, and it's often confusing, I think. So I think you just want to be clear, okay, if this is a KPI, that's the language we're using, cool, but let's define, well, what does that mean? Is it an indicator, or is it the thing that we really care about?
Like, so I'm an HR guy, so when I hear
Yeah.
KPIs, I think of that specifically being attached to certain skills or behaviors.
True, yes. So a lot of times the KPI would say, okay, because I've seen it say, okay, what I just described as the success metric, is that here's our KPIs, right? Or here's the optimization metrics, like those are our KPIs. It's typically the metrics that people care about and are paying attention to. But I think it's useful to go deeper and say, okay, this is our KPI, that's what we want to call it. Cool, but what are we going to do with this? Are we going to tie our success to it? We're going to optimize against it? We're just going to look at it and use it for context.
I think
I'm gonna do one more question.
Yeah, you were talking about the learning agenda and identifying, I think one of the first things was to identify the problems or the gaps with your business partners.
Mhm.
Are there any tools or methodologies that you leverage to make that efficient or to get to the bottom problem?
Here's what I've found to be helpful is to, number one, kind of have in mind certain pillars or topics that you want to get into. Like if it's marketing media, you might say, care about the channel mix, you care about how much money you spend, or you care about the segment, or you care about like each individual channel might have certain learnings or gaps around it, like digital versus TV or whatever, right? And what I'll do is we'll say like, okay, here's have like a clipboard of like one page that covers each of those kind of pillars. And then what I found very helpful is to give everyone like sticky notes.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of just, you can also just be like, let's brainstorm and kind of write it all out, but it's labor intensive. You say, everyone just think by yourself and write down on a sticky note all the questions and problems that you have related to these things. And people put it up there, and then you go through a process of like, oh, a lot of people put the same thing. Let's combine those. Or like almost only one person put this kind of unusual thing, and it's not actually important, so let's kill that one, right? And then that's a great way to kind of crowdsource and have a sense of like, okay, here are the things that we really care about.
Cool.
All right.